crimes is right now it's currently legal, and so be 18, and you have all 12 of the jury has to convict you, and you have to be given the death penalty.
Yeah, lately the death penalty has been a really disputed topic. There's been a lot of talk about attempting to abolish the death penalty for several other reasons. I personally believe that the death penalty should be kept. I think that it's useful and it helps to prevent several crimes, and is also a very valuable punishment.
I have most of the same things. I think you should have it to prevent people from killing other people because they don't want to be killed themselves in jail. And having the rest of your life in jail costs more money. I think there should be the death penalty because if you give someone life in prison, then it's just wasting a bunch of money to keep them in prison. And if they killed someone, they deserve to be killed too, because that's just not fair.
Yeah, I agree. There's that punishment aspect of it. Like, if someone commits the same crime and another person is sentenced to death for it, you're more like going to prevent people from doing it. It's going to scare people out of committing those crimes and almost make like a little bit safer world, I guess you could say, because people aren't going to weigh their option of, oh, I spend life in prison, to, oh, they're going to kill me if I commit this crime.
I personally think that there should not be a death penalty. And one counter argument to what you just said, how you said that the people aren't going to care if they are getting life in prison or getting killed, I feel like that works against your argument, because when they're out there doing these atrocious crimes, I don't think they really care I think they more care about if they get caught. I think they are pretty much accepting of the fact that they're going to be killed or life in prison, either one. I don't think they really care about that. I think they care more about getting caught. Like, I feel like when these people are doing these terrible things, I feel like something's wrong in their mind. I don't think it has more to do with how they are thinking about what's going to happen to them. I understand that the money aspect is important, but my problem is when you have two people committing the same crime and one person gets the death penalty and the other person doesn't, where do you draw the line, and how can you put qualifications out of all of the crimes in all of the different situations? And you have to look at the people they've been around, the people they raised, their family, the victim's family. I feel like there's just too many qualifications to be able to just pinpoint one specific resume that if they have this certain thing, then they get the death penalty, because I feel like that's pretty unfair.
Yeah, I feel like there is a situational aspect to it, but crimes that are deserving of the death penalty, like your murders during felonies, stuff like that, there's a definite way to prove whether or not it's deserving. There's always that premeditated aspect to it. You can tell if something has been planned, and you can tell if it was intentional. That plays a really big role in whether or not someone should receive the death penalty.
If it was accidental or something like that, or someone was under the influence of alcohol or had a mental disability when they were committing the thing.
So you think if let's say they were drunk, they killed 3 people, and one of them happened to be a child, do they get the death penalty because they weren't in the right state of mind? They would never do that if they were sober. At what point does it change? Because you can argue that the right state of mind is different for everybody.
So I think if they're drunk, the charges should at least not be the death penalty, because they didn't really have the mental capacity to know what they were doing if they were drunk.
Yeah.
If they weren't drunk, they wouldn't be going around killing children.
So at what point does the crime become so bad that their mental capacity doesn't matter?
Well, I feel like, again, it goes back to the premeditated part. If you're under the influence, you're almost not making a sound decision to commit the crime that you're committing.
So it doesn't count as premeditated.
Yeah, so it's not really seen as something that's premeditated and planned, which I feel like would show a real malicious intention.
So what if like, so think of like a horrible crime that in no situation is it not a death penalty, but you were under the influence. Like, so even though it's not premeditated, it's horrific enough that if they weren't under the influence, no doubt you would give them death penalty.
Yeah, I believe when it gets to that point where someone has done something that horrific to where it almost being under the influence and stuff like that doesn't matter, I think that is placed more in the jury's hands. At that point, it becomes more of a moral decision rather than a statistical decision.
But how can you trust the jury? Because, like, if you think about it, it's 12 people. And those 12 people, they could come from anywhere. And you don't know their backgrounds, their experiences with people. Like, some of them could be racist. Some of them could, like, already have premeditated problems. And so I feel like you kind of have to really, like, think about the jury when it comes to these death penalty cases. And I just feel like the jury needs to be very well thought out and very well educated and maybe even extended.
So despite the jury, all their bias, whatever, whether they're educated in the law, anything like that, there should be a set line that kind of details what constitutes the death penalty. I mean, you can't always have it up to decision of the jury or to the judge. I think that there should be a set line. And once that line is crossed, I think that you should be eligible for the death penalty.
So can you give me that line? Because my whole reasoning for there shouldn't be a death penalty is because you can't create a line because it's just too broad with all the crimes and all the things that people can do.
Well, I think it comes like back to the mental thing and like if they planned what they were gonna do. I think if they planned what they were gonna do, they definitely get the death penalty. But if it's self-defense, they don't get the death penalty, stuff like that. But if it was like an accident, or you have like if you have proof it was an accident, or it was like due to mental disease or alcohol, you probably shouldn't get the death penalty.
I agree. I feel like age is another big factor. I mean, modern technology has proven that your brain's not fully developed till you're 25 years old, and I feel like at that point you could be eligible for the death penalty, but prior to that point in your life, you're not developed enough to where there's almost no way of changing you. There's no point in putting you into a prison. So that's part of it. And then also, like Caden said, the premeditated part is also another huge line for me. If you're making the decision completely sound to commit murder or commit a felony or even several other crimes to that height, that's something that would constitute the death penalty because you're choosing that. You're making that choice. And having the death penalty is going to prevent that choice from being made. So I think that that's another really huge part of it.
So you're saying, because you did say that you said that people can change, right? Do you believe people can change?
Yeah, I do. I feel like they can change to an extent. If you're making the sound decision to commit murder or several murders to an extent to where people would believe that it's worthy of the death penalty, I think that's the line that's crossed where change can't happen. But for youth to commit this crime or do something like this, I feel like they can be changed, they can be taught, they can still develop to learn, to fix their mistake, to change their mistake. And also, I think by giving them either life in prison or a longer sentence, they can be taught what they did was wrong rather than killing them for something wrong.
Okay, so I agree, but so no matter what the person does, if they're in their youth, you're not giving them the death penalty?
No, I feel like the death penalty should not be given to minors.
Okay, because most of my research was it was looking at cases, and in a lot of the situations it's got to deal with like their mental state, like and you know, to address your point earlier, because I know you kept talking about
tax money. You know, you're sending this person for life, and we're having to pay for that. To address that, there's only been 355 people that have been executed in the past 12 years, and most of them have came from Texas and Oklahoma. So that's only 2 states. So if you're not living in those 2 states, you're not dealing with that at all. And so I think it's pretty insignificant, the amount of money that you'll be paying. And each year, the amount of executions decrease like significantly. And so I just feel like to address your argument, and then also I feel like it's too broad of a spectrum, because I agree with your point saying that the youth shouldn't be given it, but then like what about when an adult commits a lesser crime than what the youth committed, but he's given the death penalty? And so I just feel like it's a really situation to situation basis when it comes to this. And I feel like if anything, there needs to be a lot of changes, because within the jury, within how it's sentenced, and with the people, you know, I just feel like it's pretty hard. So unless you get a straight outline, I feel like it's too hard to give a death penalty to anyone.
And when you said if adult does a lesser crime than the kids under 18 and they still get the death penalty, that goes back to what you were talking about before when you said the brain doesn't develop till 25 and people like older than 25 should be charged and people under 25 shouldn't. So that kind of counteracts your argument right there.
But I feel like, while I do agree that people's brains don't develop till 25, I feel like a lot of people would disagree that, for example, like shooting a school, like I feel like a person at 17, I feel like a lot of people would disagree that that's big enough of a crime to give them the death penalty, and it shouldn't matter whether they're 17 or 45.
Yeah, I see your point, but I'm still on the side of if you're an adult making that decision, you have the development and the means to make that decision. Now, I understand the whole, if they're under the influence, outside factors that could affect it, but if you're talking your typical educated person making that decision, I feel like they shouldn't be treated the same as a minor who hasn't developed their brain enough to understand really the consequence of their decision. And also, a younger person that commits that crime can be influenced. They still have room for influence. And an older person, when they make that decision, it's almost set in their mind to make that decision, and they have all of the resource in the world to choose whether or not they think it's a good idea, and they've already committed to it.
And to know that's wrong, too.
And I do agree that if you're 40 years old and you're doing that, I agree. It should be punishable by death. But the only reason I'm saying here that you can't do that is just because there's a lot of situations where it's teetering, you know, you don't know if you should give it to them, and I just feel like it's just too broad of a spectrum. And while in that situation, I agree, someone shoots up a school, give them death penalty. That's a terrible, terrible thing. But like, it's just when it comes to other crimes, other situations, it's too hard to dissect it all.
And I have a point to argue. Should there be a line, like the severity of, like the amount of people they kill or how they kill it? Like if someone like shoots up a school or something like that, should they get the death penalty compared to a 17-year-old that just killed one person?
We're at like 6 minutes, and we did like 7 minutes yesterday, so we could wrap it up.
You should answer that question.
Okay.
You're asking me that? If what?
I can edit it, just keep asking.
If like a kid shoots up a school and kills like 20 people, should he get the death penalty? And then if another kid only kills one person, they don't get the death penalty. Like, what should be the line about the severity of the killing and how many people they kill?
Oh, well, that's for you to answer. I'm saying that that's too hard for me to give someone my own age to give them the death penalty for doing something. I feel like that's too hard for me to set a line across for doing such an atrocity. So I feel like there shouldn't be a death penalty at all, because me personally, I cannot make that line. So I feel like that's more for you to answer.
Yeah, overall, there's just so many factors that go into choosing whether or not someone should receive that sentence. And I feel like all of these factors make it almost impossible to draw a definite line. And I feel it should really be placed in the hands of the judge and the jury. It should be something that's decided based on situation. And overall, situation is really what it comes down to. The situation of what happens, where, when, who, why. That decides it for me. That's going to be your line. It's based off of whatever situation you're placed in. That's the line for the death penalty. And yes, it should be kept, but it's to an extent, it's a circumstantial thing.